Good morning, everyone. As you start to join in. Oh, hold on. Okay, missing something. There we go. Oh, there you go. Hey, Dana. Galileo Ambassador Award honoree. How you doing? Let people join in. It's always awesome to see the names of everyone coming in. It's like I know you guys, even if it's just via email. So we will be recording, as you've probably already gotten the warning or the disclaimer through Zoom about this session. It is being recorded, and we are going to be answering questions during the session. So if you have questions, put them in chat. You can also raise your hand. You can be unmuted, later on if the speakers would like to do that. You can also put your questions in the Q&A. And so with that, I will let Jeff Gallant go ahead and get started. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Joy, and thanks everybody for attending. I'm Jeff Gallant. I'm the Program Director of Affordable Learning Georgia here in the University System of Georgia. With me today is Nakita Afaha. She is the Program Manager of Affordable Learning Georgia and going to be running the cool engagement sessions in what otherwise would have been nothing but information on my part. So I'm really glad that Nakita is bringing her instructional design knowledge into this presentation. So this question that we've posted right here on the title does not have a very easy answer. Does open education work? Of course, it's complicated. But what we want to present to you today is the result of research that's happened right here in the University System of Georgia, from the inception of Affordable Learning Georgia all the way up to today, seeing what we've found and hopefully what's on the horizon. And we want to hear from you about your perceptions, about pros and cons and all kinds of things, including just a really easy one to get us started too. But first, a little bit about ourselves. I've been the lead person on Affordable Learning Georgia in whatever title for quite a while, since 2014 when we got started. Before then, I was at Valdosta State University as a reference librarian. I also taught an information society class over there. We were faculty. And then came over here to Athens in 2016, and I've been full-time with the university system ever since. Nakita, tell us a little bit about you.
Yeah, absolutely. Good morning, everyone. Again, I'm Nakita Afaha. And so I joined Affordable Learning Georgia just about a year ago. So I've celebrated my year anniversary here in May. Before that, I've worked in roles in higher education within the University System of Georgia in the roles of student advocates, academic advisors, as well as most recently as an instructional designer in various applications in the University System of Georgia. So I'm happy to join the team here with Affordable Learning Georgia as we champion the cause for accessible education through the open principles.
And Dana's wishing you a happy anniversary.
Thank you, Dana.
All right. So we're going to start off with the first link. Nakita's going to be posting these into chat. It'll bring you over to a webpage, and that's where you can respond. We'd love to hear from you on all of these questions. Now that we've got the link up, I'm going to jump to the next slide. It's asking where you're joining us from today. And this is a Georgia map because most of you, although you might be on a trip somewhere, are going to be here in the state of Georgia. We're seeing some Clark, some Muskogee and Bibb County, some Chatham folks over on the coast, Franklin County, Lumpkin. All right. We got some Troop and Floyd.
I'll just interrupt just for a second to let everyone know that our polls today do have a limit of responses. And so if we do reach that limit and you're not able to participate, please do indeed drop your answer in the chat. But we do want to at least let those who can participate join in so for the visual. And of course, like Jeff said, if you're not actually in your physical location today and you're traveling or you happen to be elsewhere, please at least write down or contribute with where you represent, the area from where you're representing. That'll be helpful as well. And good
Thanks so
gosh,
much.
quite a few.
Yeah, I completely forgot. Yeah, we've got a lot of folks in North Georgia. I
We
see
have
some Lowndes County, hello from where I used to be.
we have Albany from in the chat.
That's Albany.
Is it?
My boss over at Reference taught me about all of the pronunciations of the towns around us.
I do have an excuse as I'm not a native Georgian, but I am willing to learn, and that is true. So perhaps our responsive have maxed out as we're getting quite a few in the chat as well. We have some who are here from the UK today. Got the Cab and
Wow.
Clarkston being represented, Bristol, UK as well. And as we have Dana letting us know that it's a very specific Georgia pronunciation. Thank you so much. Thank you, Brittany, who's
Brittany says
that
again. I think you said it correctly. All right.
All right. Well, it's good to see that we have quite a wide variety of people representing us here today. And that's really important, not only as we talk about open education, the research that's happening in the university system, but understanding too that everything that we're talking about today has a wide audience, a wide reach, as every one of you are dealing with different issues and concerns within the different parts of the state that you're representing. And we can use some of those same concerns across the nation and globally as well. And so that's one of the reasons we want to see where everyone's coming from today.
All right, and we'll do a couple more of these as we go along. They will be a little bit more involved than where are you, but that'll be pretty fun. All right, let's go on. So let's talk just a bit about Affordable Learning Georgia and about Open Ed before we dive right into it. Some of you know this very well. Hi, Dana, how are you? But not everybody is very familiar with Affordable Learning Georgia. So we'll go through some of the basics. We are an initiative through Galileo. We started out as kind of the ideas floating around the region's academic committee on libraries, the leaders of those libraries, often the deans, who were saying we should really get into open education. Georgia has a very unique place in the world of libraries integrating into educational resources. We were the site of the court case that determined what the heck courts were going to do with fair use when it came to e-reserves and textbooks. That all came from British publishers who banded together and said that the e-reserves program at Georgia State was violating copyright. It was a very long case. It was appealed many times, remanded many times. Everybody followed it with an increased amount of focus as it became something that was going to determine the future of what it is to provide the resources that you have access to your students, and to hopefully provide them in an affordable way that saves them money. We came out of that pretty good in terms of the court case itself, but we also had a sensitivity that copyright was going to, I wouldn't say completely get in the way of access to educational resources, but it was a barrier. And open licensing could ameliorate that barrier if we had the rights and the permissions to distribute things, and we saw them immediately right in front of us. We had those permissions that this could be a new way of sharing resources. So yeah, started out with librarians. We brought instructional designers in immediately. Instructional designers were key to making the state resources in eCore available to everyone, starting all the way back in 2000. And we brought in instructional designers from both the University System Office and from UGA over with Eddie Watson to start building this. Grants were something that we landed on because our instructors have academic freedom. They want to teach with what they want to teach with. They teach the way that they teach. They teach with what they would like to teach. So it's not one of those things where a department just goes, "We're shifting to this thing, so all of you are teaching with it." Um, in order for faculty to either find open resources and make them their own, make them nice and relevant and exactly tuned to the learning outcomes that they want, or to create new resources and share them openly, they needed time. So we offered grants to transform your course from commercial textbooks to open textbooks and other open materials. And that was the first thing that we did. For a couple of years, we just had these transformation grants. After that, we added on what we called mini grants at the time. They are continuous improvement grants now. The idea is that, yes, you made that transformation years ago, and that's great, but you need some extra time to make these resources either more current, more engaging, maybe even just fixing some stuff that you've always wanted to fix but never had the time for. In order to keep this sustainable, in order for you to go, I want to keep teaching with these resources and saving students money in the process. This has resulted in everything from new editions of open textbooks to entire video series that became the textbook over at Georgia Highlands College. And it's been really neat to see this in practice. There's also been quite a bit of open work that's been published as a result of this because folks need to share their stuff openly within these grants. So we've shared them in a digital commons repository, Galileo Open Learning Materials. That integrates into the Georgia Knowledge Repository, which means that if you search Galileo, you can find all of these open resources. We also have a new way to host open resources in a more web readable and accessible way. It is a manifold instance called OpenALG. Both of these have our resources listed on them. We usually host them in OpenALG if they're new, but they will get an entry in our digital commons repository, which means that the stuff in Manifold is going to be visible in digital commons, which means it's in GKR, which means it's in Galileo search. Now, open education is something that you may know, something that you might be tangentially familiar with if you're big into open access. Open educational resources are ones that you can use, but also ones that you can customize. Just by seeing that resource, you have permission for it. It's enabled by open licensing, and our open licensing is usually Creative Commons licenses. This isn't open educational software so much. If it's software, you could put something like a GNU GPL on it. Creative Commons licenses have the building block of attribution first, meaning that you're passing along that history of open from one remix or one revision to the next. So if you use an open resource, you're attributing that open resource, you can go back to that open resource. It's kind of an open web provenance of sorts. There's share alike, which means that if you are using an open resource, you're going to have to use the same license on your new resource. That passes along openness. It's kind of like a responsibility of keeping open alive. Non-commercial means that if you're using a resource that uses this thing, you can't profit off of it. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't use a commercial print shop to print out a copy for your student and give your student that copy of the resource. That's not the same thing. That's making it as accessible as you possibly can to a student that needs it. But you can't sell your thing at a profit. Of course, if you created it and you put an open license on it, you still hold the copyright. So you can do what you want with it. Others who bring that in, they have the non-commercial permission on that. Dana Casper has an entire Creative Commons course linked there, and it is awesome. There's even a Creative Commons certification course if you want to work within open. That's a wonderful way to get started. So thank you, Dana, for sharing that. Now, Resources, that's the big library thing, right? We love talking about the resources that we have, how we provide them, how we write metadata for them, make them discoverable. But what about teaching with them? What makes it different when you're teaching with open? That's open pedagogy. That's using the power of these open resources within the classroom, within instruction. That is more on the side of empowering students because you have these resources that are flexible, and you can have students create new resources that are flexible. You can have other students come in and customize those or revise them or edit them over time. And so you may have students who are creating new knowledge and then more students later that build on that new knowledge. It's a great idea. Now, part of open pedagogy is that this involves student work, like homework and things like that. But you are sharing their work at a larger scale. So often you will ask students if they want to do this. They may even fill out a little form that says, yes, make my stuff public, or no, please do not make my stuff public. I'm very worried about that. Giving them both the agency to create and share knowledge, but also the agency to say, okay, I do not want my stuff out in public at the same time. Yeah, so open pedagogy, another part of open education, but a little different from what open educational resources are. So how do you measure and evaluate all of this? The use of OER, open pedagogy, and its efficacy. Um, where does the impact happen? It's a newer field, so we don't have a lot of old research that we can build on in this. It's about 2012 when open education proliferated. There have been open education conferences for years and years and years. And there were like 30 people in the middle of Ohio, and it was an open education conference. But by 2012, when OpenStax released their first textbooks, that's when things got bigger. And so you're not going to see much research happen before 2012 on open education and open pedagogy. What we're measuring is mostly within the COO framework that the Open Education Group came up with. That's measuring cost. We often do that outside of research articles. We're measuring it as part of our data governance. Outcomes. So how did this affect learning outcomes? Usage. Um, are students using this at all when they're in a class and they have access to more stuff? You can use analytics. You can look at how it's being used and if there are problems with the user experience that way. And perceptions, not just student perceptions, although those are incredibly important, but also faculty perceptions, because one of the things that you see when you present someone with a free resource is some skepticism that, well, what's the catch? It's free. What's going on here? Now, there isn't really a catch when it comes to open education. People are doing this and they are professionals, they are teaching with it and they are sharing it out with the world. But there is a quality perception barrier to wanting to adopt an open resource. So measuring those perceptions is also something that folks have measured quite a bit. Now, I'm going to turn this over to Nakita. The one thing I want to say about this is try to answer. Even if this is new to you, go right ahead and throw something out there. Go ahead, Nakita.
Yeah, absolutely. So everyone, before we move on to the next section of the presentation, where Jeff is going to go into a little bit more about what he's found in the research, we want to kind of get an idea of your perceptions. What do you think are the pros and cons of open education in any way? So I'm going to go ahead and post the poll link in the chat for the first question, which is the pros. So everyone, please, again, and Jeff, you can go ahead and advance to the next slide so we can see the responses coming in. But what we want is for you to put in your responses for the pros. And what we're looking for, let's just make sure that this is active. Let me activate that. Make sure that that is active. A second. No, it is active. Okay, it is active. So once you put in an item, you are welcome to vote up and down for responses that are already there. And of course, again, we have a limit on the number of respondees. So if you get a note that says you can't respond, please do add that to the chat. We want to invite you to this conversation as well. So we'll just give a few more seconds here. Thank you so much for those who are participating. And as we see some of the pros, cost and instant access is definitely one that is getting voted up quite a bit. Cost effective for students, of course. Accessibility is there, voted up high. And of course, cutting down on the textbook costs is also voted pretty high. And just checking the chat to see if there are others. And we've got a couple of other pros here with the flexibility, equity, as well as I saw on there, although it's kind of gone down a little bit further, the flexibility in being able to do that. Yeah, the flexibility for changing. Thank you, Jeff. Yeah. So as you can see, there's quite a list of pros for open education. Now let's move on to the cons. What are your perceptions of the cons? And I'm going to drop that response link in the chat as well. And so there, if you would please do the same thing for the cons. We'll just hang tight a moment. And we see the first item there, limited faculty buy-in. Definitely that's been voted up quite a bit already. Skepticism, as Jeff mentioned earlier, especially related to things like quality. Indeed, lack of time for creation, definitely. We've heard that many times before in our interactions with faculty and staff. And we appreciate the idea of looking at digital literacy skills as well. And I have seen where some students do not like the digital formats. Quality concerns, of course, is showing up again. Access to the internet is definitely still a concern in some areas, which is another reason why we put up the Georgia map. There are some areas in rural Georgia that have difficulty in getting consistent access to the internet. Thank you, Jeff, for scrolling up and down there. There's quite a few cons here that we can look at. Thank you all for participating. I think we'll move on to the next slide so Jeff can kind of talk about the research that he's found that maybe even to address some of these perceptions that you guys have put out here today. And of course, please continue to contribute in the chat and we'll continue to talk about this. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Really, really good stuff here. And you'll see throughout the presentation that we've been thinking a lot about this, and so have our grantees. When we have our grant program end for a particular project, the final reports that are submitted by the team include a sustainability plan, and they include any plans for scholarship or research at the end of final report. Just in fall 2023, which was the last big one that we had, 22 out of the 29 projects that ended were resulting in or already resulted in scholarship. So that can be presentations, that can be participation on a panel, that can be writing scholarly articles about their open education experience. And now we've had 10 years of grants with scholarship resulting from ALG grantee work. And so, what has the research from the USG faculty and staff been on open education? Now, this isn't going to be every article that we have. We've assembled all of them on the site in the R Impact page. But some highlights we're going to go over are what these grantees have found. Now, one thing you're going to see is that at first, you're going to see some 2017s. Now, why wouldn't we have research articles in 2014? Well, in 2014, we gave out our first grants. That was in fall of 2014 that these teams got started. They did all of their implementation work in fall 2014. They started teaching with these resources in spring of 2015. Their final reports came out at the end of spring 2015. So the first time that any of this information would have been out there for other people to see was summer of 2015. So you've got people who started learning about open, implemented resources in these projects, including Emily Croto, um, and now they are starting to gather that information over late 2015 into 2016, writing an article, getting it peer reviewed, doing revisions if necessary, and then having it published in an issue. So you're going to see the earliest stuff from 2014 really hit in 2017, including this one, which was part of the first round of grants only. What Emily had found was that there's consistency between the performance before OER were implemented and after they were implemented. So students were saving money, but there was not a difference in the quality or understandability between the commercial resources that were being used and the OER that were being implemented afterwards. Students didn't seem to have any perceptions that were indicated a difference of quality or understandability. Yeah, so very interesting, no change kind of finding at first here. Another one from 2017 over at Georgia Southwestern State University, Judy Grissett and Dr. Vojtek. So they found that students were perceiving the faculty that are using open textbooks as more kind, more encouraging, more creative. Um, on this one, and you'll get the slides afterwards. These are a lot of links, and we're not just going to spam chat with them, but they're all linked at the top in these citations. They're all open resources. You'd be able to find out everything you need from there. So one of the parts of it that I pulled out as a highlight here was that the folks that indicated that the textbook costs of an OER were a positive aspect of that. Um, were they were used to justify the likelihood of taking that course for faculty members who use an open textbook compared to a traditional copyrighted textbook. So you'll see in other parts of it that there's these correlations between our instructor is more kind, or encouraging, and creative, and all of that. But this was also a neat one where it seems like if because they thought that it was a positive, that they were saving money on their textbook, they would go into another course where they knew that a faculty instructor was teaching with an open textbook. They'd be more likely. We also have a team at UGA, the UGA Center for Teaching and Learning, which includes Eddie Watson right up here, Denise Demezi, and Sherry Closer. Um, they wanted to know particularly about OpenStax. And the reason why is that UGA had a Gates Foundation grant that included implementing OpenStax. It was part of this frontier set that many institutions were a part of. They were implementing some sort of electronic courseware and seeing what happened. And with UGA, it was OER, and particularly it was OpenStax. So they asked an open-ended question. They had a whole survey for students afterwards. They asked what they liked best about the OpenStax book. Uh, as you would expect, students weren't writing essays on these open-ended questions. But a lot of them were things like, hey, it is free. The most common response that they liked was that it's free. They also liked that they could easily access the text. This is something that pops up quite a bit in student responses when we see our final reports come back too. We always get 3 quotes, one positive, one negative or critical, and something in the middle there too. And this one really does illuminate the idea that if you have something that one is digital, but two, you don't have to log in and use a username and password to get to, uh, you're going to have an easier time with it. So you can just access it from whichever device you have immediately. Now, moving along a little bit more here, this was a critical article that happened that's been talked about nationwide ever since, and one that needs to be replicated at a larger scale than even this, which was already at a pretty large scale because it was at UGA, with so many instructors who had taught with commercial resources and moved to open textbooks, but not just any open textbooks, just OpenStax textbooks because of this Gates Foundation grant project that happened. So yeah, this is a little bit more about the methodology over on the right side, but on the left side, it's the really incredible stuff that they found. They disaggregated their student success data by race, by gender, by Pell eligibility, by part-time and full-time. And what they found was that yes, OER use increased performance for everyone a little bit overall. But when you broke it down by folks who would have traditionally a harder time in college, including those who are eligible for a Pell Grant, students that are of non-white races and ethnicities, and part-time students as opposed to full-time students, the folks who would have had a harder time in college disproportionately did better than before. It was a bigger increase for those folks, which really suggests that the access to these resources and the zero cost of them is helping them achieve their goals in a bigger way. It's hard to do this. I can't do this just looking at the grants data that we have because we can't just go into student data and pull all of this out. But this very involved and very well analyzed article has been kind of the foundation of OER as an equity measure, as something that affects especially the folks who have a tough time in college, kind of evening that playing field, evening the access. Nakita says the presentation is now available. Yep, in the conference schedule manager, and there's a lot of links in there, as we had said. So now we're moving towards things that were published in 2021. So we're not quite at the pandemic when it comes to the information they're using, but we are publishing during the pandemic at this point. So this is Tomo Nagashima and Susan Rock over at Columbus State University. One of the things that they were looking at within the faculty perceptions of using OER was whether or not a grant motivates them to use it, and what else motivates them to use OER. So they found that obviously the cost of other course materials was pushing folks towards OER. Things being way too expensive over here meant they were going to look for something else. A desire to increase student success helps as well, and the availability of grants helps in folks exploring OER. And there's some national research out there by the Bayview Analytics Group that looks more broadly at faculty perceptions. And one thing that they found was just the existence of an open education focused initiative or any kind of affordable learning initiative in their institution or in their state or consortium increased the amount of awareness of OER immediately. So not everybody in this study got a grant when they went out and adopted OER, but they heard about it, they thought about it, they planned it out. Maybe they submitted a proposal, maybe they didn't get a grant. Maybe they were just one faculty member who couldn't find a big enough team, but they got to know open enough that they still used it. So that was really cool. That's something that we can't measure very well because we can't really just jump into places that we don't have data on from grants, or we don't always know who's using OER because that's not being, as kind of an ethical point, tracked. So now we're into COVID. This is an article on computer science from Columbus State University. They found that students did not perceive differences in quality or usability with the open textbook that they had in computer science, which is a very tough course to have any kind of course materials in. It was interesting though, they had some significant differences in the article that I thought were, it was something to think about. Students who used the textbook were more likely to have a less positive attitude towards the online format of that textbook. Now, this is during the pandemic that they're seeing this. This is during the emergency transition to online materials. But students that had a higher motivation to learn, as indicated in a different part of this study, uh, perceived OER as a better resource than the traditional textbook compared with students with lower motivation to learn. And that's one of those things that we can't necessarily just say, well, here's the reason why. It's just interesting. Yeah, as Dana says, it's really interesting. Not sure why. Maybe this is just, hey, it was at Columbus State, and we need something bigger than that to take more of a look, or it's some sort of result of what was happening during COVID, because all commercial resources suddenly got shifted online, and I think there was some shock over there as well. So yeah, a very interesting and weird one where you just kind of go, all right. Um, a really funny one, but also an insightful one came from our previous program manager, Tiffany Tiarina, and Jonathan Arnett, a professor in communication. And Dr. Arnett had been doing this for a little while. He'd been putting Google Analytics, basic pseudonymous analytics, onto his open work to see if the usage by his students increased at any certain time. When did they use it? Do they use it at all? What he found was kind of predictable. They weren't using the materials until quizzes or tests hit, and it was early on that the quizzes and tests were indicating textbook use the most. And later on, it was less of a factor. What he said during that presentation back at KSU was that I think folks got to know that the notes and other ancillary resources were things that you could use to find out what was, to find out what was important and therefore be more prepared for exactly that test. But they took it even further and they looked at a departmental adoption of their open education textbook. And so this is all about students using OER are about as inconsistent as students not using OER. So you can bring a student to a textbook, but you can't make them read. And their use of the supplementary resources that seem to have a positive effect on their perception of the OER, so long as they chose to use them. And their interest in open and the perception of the quality of a resource don't appear to be related. They don't really seem to be concerned with quality so much. And there were some Kennesaw, there was a Kennesaw student panel at the same time as Dr. Arnett's presentation back, I think it was 2017, 2018, where it was a lot more students wanted to know what they were being held accountable for. And that was really the big thing, relevance. What was going to affect them now? What's going to affect them in the future? So I think keeping your resources relevant is kind of a side note to this. And Dana says, what is that tenet of adult education? They need to know the underlying reason. That's very true. So I took you through a whole bunch of USG research on this. Not all of it, but some really interesting ones, some impactful ones, some early ones, some late ones, a pandemic one. Um, there's plenty of non-USG research out there, of course. We're not the only state that's had open education research. Check out the Open Ed Group's review project. The website has changed a little bit. That site is up to date. Before, we were all trying to access the old links and we went, oh no, the page is down. It's okay. They rebuilt the whole site. They have a living literature review over there. As big, impactful studies continue to happen within the realm of open education, the review project grows and grows and grows. And they segment it into different sections like perceptions and efficacy. This is the open education group that had the COO framework, the cost, outcomes, usability, and perception framework. So yeah, definitely check out the review project to get into non-USG research about it. Although some of the USG research is in the review project because of course it is. So I'm going to bring you to another poll through Nakita. I'm going to turn it over to her.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Jeff. And of course, we appreciate everyone who is participating in chat as well. And if you have questions along the way, please do indeed drop those in chat. We'll have a session at the end as well. But I wanted to ask you guys where we might focus now on the research. You've seen some of the things that we've talked about in the USG, and of course, you'll be able to visit the non-USG research. What are the gaps? What are the things we need to look at from here? So I'm going to drop again the poll. It's another poll that you can use to vote up or down. I'll drop the poll link there in the chat. And Jeff, you'll advance to the next slide, and we will begin to see if there's anyone who has some input about where we might focus more research now, and where some of the gaps are. What are some of the questions we can look at? Thank you so much for this participation. And of course, you can vote up and down on some of the things that are being participated responses. And again, remember, there's a limited number of responses available. So if you don't get to respond in the poll, please do indeed add that to the chat. And Robin has contributed that usage by non-students would be some research to look at. That's in the chat there. And we have some votes for the poll and application in public libraries, as well as classes or workshops in OER creation, research and comparing titles of the same subject, and use in high school advanced placement as well. We have some research ideas for on-site assistance with navigating the grant process.
I'm going to share a link real quick in chat
Right.
because I'm seeing the application in public libraries comment here. I had met with folks in the Gwinnett County Library System, I think it was back in 2017, I think. And they wanted to know how they could get OER more usable for their patrons. And what they found was that the workforce development / career and technical development OER were going to be more helpful for them. So Skills Commons is one that I would highly suggest for that. If you've ever heard of Merlot, one of the oldest repositories of materials, Skills Commons is an offshoot of that that focuses on community college and technical college focused resources. So they can immediately be applicable to folks' careers and skill development.
Indeed. Thank you, Jeff. And that's one of the wonderful things about open education is being able to customize the materials to the audiences for maximum consumption. And so Skills Commons has a particular audience in mind, and that's very helpful. And so we have quite a few other responses here on the poll, including using AI to create different versions. And let's see what else we have not looked at that. Jeff, if you'll scroll down, see if there's other items here we haven't paid attention to. A research question about whether or not educators take advantage of the ability to mix and match chapters from multiple OERs. And then, of course, some research about usability by people not trained as educators as well. So as you can see, there's quite a bit more opportunity, obviously, for more research and for the gaps of questions we need to look at. And so, Jeff, I'll turn it back over to you because I think you might have some insight on some of this.
All right, well, let's go on to what we think is next and what we're doing next. The first thing that we're doing next are a series of research grants. Just like with the academic freedom of folks to use the materials that they want in the USG and to teach the way they want in the USG, we wanted to keep a research program open-ended within the USG to, fit people's place where they are, their skills in research, and come up with teams and come up with a plan to do an impactful research project instead of just saying, you will measure this and go do it. This is a limited funding category within our grants. We can't connect this to student savings in the most direct way that we could with something like both a transformation grant or a continuous improvement grant. But in answering or at least addressing the big questions about open education, we're contributing to a larger conversation that hopefully will keep this more sustainable over time. So yes, it doesn't necessarily immediately save students money, but it is something that contributes to a larger systematic approach that hopefully will keep education affordable. What else is next is more national coordination. We have a connected state system here, or at least a system-wide consortium here, because we have Galileo, and we also have our Affordable Learning Georgia champions, including at least one of you in the chat. I see Dana is participating in the chat as an ALG champion here. Um, and that's really good, but the Georgia stuff doesn't tend to leave Georgia until someone asks us about it. And that's, we can answer folks' questions as they come in through email, but it would be better if we were all networked in a much larger way, trying to break down those silos of just location. We don't even have a society or a disciplinary organization when it comes to open ed. We say now it's not just a movement, it's a field, but we don't really have the structure behind it. So the regional compacts, the multi-state ones, such as SREB and WICHE over in the west, and NEBI over in the northeast, and MEC in the middle, they are all getting together to try to figure out what it is we need and how they can help. That's not done yet, but do stay tuned because ALG will be participating in any ways that can connect our stuff more with the national open education scene, and find ways that other folks can help us in growing our program. We need bigger studies on things like learning outcomes and retention, like that UGA study that disaggregated the data did. WICHE, which is that the Western organization for multi-state compacts, they are starting one that is all about bringing in research data from institutions and aggregating it, making it all align with each other cleanly, and then hopefully presenting some more than statewide data on outcomes, on efficacy, disaggregating things into equity categories. That's still needed right now, and I hope that initiative, that effort that's just getting started, will lead to something big. And less studies that just focus on all students, because if you give somebody who would have bought every textbook anyway an open resource, well, that's great. There are flexibility and relevance reasons why that can help, but the access reason is completely gone. Focusing more on the groups that would benefit from those affordable materials as well. And of course, more emphasis on the teaching and learning aspects, on open pedagogy. What happens when students are sharing their knowledge with the world? What happens to learning outcomes when this goes on? So what else? Well, obviously, as everyone is remarking, generative AI tools are here. We don't know how this is going to differ in both the commercial resource world and the open world from what came before. We know that OpenStax has just partnered up with Google Gemini. They don't even have a thing yet, but soon enough, you should be able to go into Google Gemini and ask just OpenStax a question, and it should be able to, using its own educational data, answer that question for you. That's coming. That's not even implemented yet. It's very much in the we just announced this phase. I'm even asking OpenStax about copyright concerns on that right now. So we're not sure. And that unsureness goes entirely all the way up to the national level. We do not have a legal framework that integrates how you can share things that you've created in Gen AI tools with the world. Some folks are saying, hey, this is a mechanical program that has generated a thing, and therefore no one's authored it, and therefore it's in the public domain. But if you tell the generative AI thing to use the data it has to do a picture of something that's trademarked, and you share that trademark thing, is that still in the public domain? So we're waiting for sure. It is a quilt made up of things other people actually made. I would argue that there's a lot of fair use in there. But yeah, I hope that this will be more clear over time. In the meantime, we have created guidelines for using generative AI tools in OER. These are just meant to be guidelines at the moment. They are somewhat about ethics and not always about here's what the law says, because the law doesn't really say much at all. Even the folks who are uh, diving into copyright law on this, they don't have much to share about it yet. So that's where we are. Just a small amount of guidelines for folks who want to use generative AI tools to create open resources. And yeah, it is a big problem. It is something that needs to be addressed at a bigger level than just, hi, we're not lawyers, but here's probably the best way that you can do this, and we'll keep this updated. But that's what we have. So that's what we're doing. So we are going to now ask what your questions are. And I will open this up also to Nakita. And yeah, definitely type some things into the chat or into Q&A. Oh, okay. Do you want me to address this Q&A, Nakita?
Oh, yes, indeed.
Okay. One attendee says, does the majority of ALG grants go towards the creation of textbooks, implementation, improvements, or other areas? So our transformation grants, which are the biggest ones that we have, they go towards proposals that teams have submitted competitively. They are reviewed by peers, they're reviewed by us, they are scored. And those are all about if you have commercial resources that you're teaching with, you are replacing those, you are saving students money, and here's what you're going to either implement that already exists, that you're going to revise or remix stuff that already exists, but you're going to make it your own, or that you're going to create. Now, the ways that folks get there is more about them than it is about us. We don't care so much if someone's going to create something or if somebody's going to remix something, if it's the best thing for their course and for their instructors. Now, if they're going to create something that we already know exists and it would be a lot of time spent on something that could already be helped by this other resource, we'll let them know about it. But most of the time, they've already done an extensive review and they've said, okay, well, here's what exists, here's what we need to make. When they make it, anything under these grants needs to be shared with the public under an open license, unless it's a quiz or a test. Those have exceptions, and it's because it's really hard to gate those behind anything and verify that someone's faculty. If it's anything else like lecture slides, videos, open textbooks, open courses, those need to be shared out under an open license that hopefully will get passed on and improved and revised and remixed also in other places. So yeah, it does go towards the creation of textbooks. It does go through the implementation of stuff that already exists and improvements. It's all three within the act of replacing your commercial materials in a course with affordable materials. There are more continuous improvement grants happening as this goes along because folks are already transforming their courses and now they are making them more sustainable. But the majority of the grant funding is through transformation grants, and those are all about making that big change, including all three of those categories. I hope that that helps.
Indeed. Thank you, Jeff. I'm looking and monitoring the question and answer session. I don't see any other questions coming in so far, but please, we have about a minute before the session officially ends. So please do share another question if you have it. We'll pause for that, but if not, okay, so we have a comment there from Dana.
Thanks, Dana.
We appreciate that. I did want to
thank you for all of your work, by the way. You do a ton.
And I'll just make note of Dana's previous comments where she said, literally, it's time to call in the lawyers. So perhaps we can all resonate with that as we get into this space. But yeah, so yeah, everyone, thank you so much for joining us. We're here at the end of our session, and I'll turn it over to you, Jeff, to do the final wrap up.
Well, thanks so much. Email us if you have any questions at jeff.gallant@usg.edu and nakita.afaha@usg.edu. Over on the ALG website, you can find a list of all of the Affordable Learning Georgia champions, including those on your campus if you're in the University System of Georgia. We are not on Twitter. Affordable Learning Georgia is on Twitter to announce the newsletters, but you can find us individually on LinkedIn. A little bit more of a boring place, but less volatile place, let's say. Thank you so much, and we will continue with this amazing conference.
Thank you, everyone.